All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Well, welcome to day number 28. So, this is day number 28 that I've been trying to sit down for about an hour, do some artwork. Some of you have been joining me, so that's very awesome. So, if you want to pop into the comments and say hi, it's always great to see who's out there. Um, yeah, so day number 28, I've been live streaming on the weekdays. And yeah, so I'm here. We've got, counting today, just 3 days left of this. So yeah, September ends on Wednesday. So we've got today, tomorrow, and Wednesday of this 30-day art challenge that I've been doing. And I apologize because it looks like my internet is kind of wonky again. So anyway, but we'll push through. And so I've been really thinking about the work I've been doing. So when I first started it this month, I really was working a very intuitive way. Just let me try to make some things. What am I drawn to? And what I've noticed is that, at least for like when I work, that certain ideas, certain things kind of come up again and again, and I always try to pay attention to those. I always try to think like, okay, what am I drawn to? What are the things that come up again and again, and what do they mean? And so at first I wasn't really sure exactly like what all that meant and what was going on with everything, but yeah, so I just wanted to like so yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to, the internet's kind of wonky, it's stressing me out. And so like I was saying that these things kept coming up over and over again, and it was like, oh, okay, what do these things mean? And so I over the last week or so, or week and a half, 2 weeks, however long, I've been more reflective. So at first it was very intuitive, just kind of working, just kind of pushing through, not really sure what I was making. And then as these things kept coming up and I kept using them and being drawn to them, then I started thinking like, okay, what is this about? What are these things? Why am I drawn to this? And so that's kind of where I am today. So I even before going live today, I sat down in my journal and I was writing about all of this and kind of where it kind of was coming from. So I'll try to share some of those ideas as we're working today. But anyway, and if you're just tuning in, and I apologize if there's some glitches and the internet's kind of funky today, but anyway, if you want to pop into the comments and say hi, awesome. If you got questions, you can pop those in there as well. But let's go ahead and dive in and get started. So got my 4" by 4" piece of paper like always. I've been really enjoying kind of limiting myself to this small size because it's a limitation, and it's kind of like, well, what can you do with this little space? What can you do with a square? And okay, I'm going to do it 30 times. So it's really kind of posed this really interesting kind of challenge. So anyway, I'm going to start off with my Inktense pencils today. And one of the things that I've been really focused on here lately, and it's popped up into some of the images that I've been making, is this, a lot of people call it a tree, but it's kind of it's an organic form that I have been kind of exploring a lot, and it is tree-like, but I don't necessarily see it as a tree. And so I'm actually going to start out with that kind of imagery. This is something that I've been really fascinated with. And it does have that kind of tree-like quality where the base is kind of a little bit bigger, almost like the roots are coming out, and then a thinner part that a lot of people read as a trunk, and then up here it does kind of branch out. So I see how people they call it a tree. And I think that's just because it's not recognizable as a real object. But it's this organic kind of natural form. And I've said in a previous live stream that I almost see it as more earth, like more like a rock, and almost like this is the ceiling of a cave, and these are the openings, and this is kind of a pillar of rock. So yeah, it's I haven't quite figured out what it is yet, and that's part of the art making process. But it's an intriguing form, and I think because it is a kind of a growth, like it does have that tree like quality, and so there's something about it, this notion of growth, or if you're thinking about it, rock, it could be this notion that over time things kind of wear away, and that a lot of caves and a lot of things that have been made because the softer earth has worn away and the harder rocks have kind of stayed, but then also have been weathered. So this idea of, I think, time passing, of growth or change. So like really just kind of thinking about how, like, you know, everything that we do has meaning. And, you know, the types of marks, the colors that we use. And sometimes those things have kind of a meaning all their own. And sometimes it's a meaning that we attribute to it. And I was just looking back at some of the things that I've shared on social media, and this form came up back in May during one of my time-lapse videos that I make on Fridays for Journal Friday. But that's not when I discovered it. Actually, this is an image, a form that I've been exploring for years. And you know, it's like it starts out as kind of a doodle in a journal. You know, and it's kind of amazing how, like, I can look back into journals and find things like this, you know, years ago. So then it's like, okay, it's taken years for this idea to kind of ferment and to kind of become something that I wanted to explore a little bit further. So it's taken a while to kind of bring it into that bring it into like some kind of meaningful way. All right, so got that started. Let's go ahead and hit it with the hair dryer. Just thinking like, okay, let's get a little bit of water and a little bit of paint, and I'm going to do this. Is something I've done a lot too, is this splattering. I want to soften this, so I'm just taking a brush that has water in it and just sort of spread over. So it's not going to, like, get rid of all the spots, but it's going to spread out some of the paint that's still wet. It might soften or lighten some of the spots that have dried. Hit that with the dryer. So I'm going to use a different pencil. The one I used first was called Mustard, and then this one is called Baked Earth. So it's a kind of a nice reddish brown terracotta kind of color. So these are ideas. These are elements that I've explored before, um, but I'm starting to feel like, okay, now I know why. Like what about it? What is the meaning behind it? And I think with a lot of art, that's kind of, we discover the meaning as we make it, and that sometimes if we set out with this strong notion in mind, like this is what it means, sometimes it can just, we try to force it and it doesn't quite turn out the way we had hoped. By allowing things to kind of develop on their own and just sort of trusting our intuition, we can start to discover things that we're drawn to. I'm drawn to using these squares. I'm drawn to using this type of line or form, or I'm drawn to using these magazine pictures. And then you explore it and you start to think like, okay, well, what's that meaning and that purpose behind it? So I've always mentioned, if you've tuned in for a lot of these live streams, that to me the geometric shapes, especially the squares and rectangles, really are about structure. And so I've really been thinking about, this form is about growth or change over time. The squares and rectangles are about structure. And so, it's like we do need to have some kind of structure, some kind of routine that allows us to kind of change, I guess. But I think if we have too much structure, then that could be a bad thing too. I mean, too much structure and we don't have any room to grow or to change. So I think, having routines, having structure, but having them that are kind of, that enable us to grow, enable us to change maybe. Or thinking about how these structures maybe tie us to our very ordinary, mundane lives, that the growth is something that's kind of pushing us out of our comfort zone. So maybe thinking of that structure as the comfort zone. So these, a lot of times when I'm sitting in my studio making art, I'm not sitting here talking to myself, but it's basically, these are the kind of thoughts that I think about as I'm making. So I've kind of covered up the that organic form a little bit. So I'm going to use the same pencil, that baked earth. I'm going to go back over that form. I might not go over every single line. And actually some of the lines are a little bit hard to see, and I might add some more. So I think this idea of self-discovery, of discovering as you're making art, that's something that's really important. And so whether I was teaching public school or teaching adults, I'm always trying to think about how can I allow my students, the participants, to really discover something, discover their own voice. And that's why I don't like to do projects. I don't teach projects. Because if I'm teaching a project, then I've already discovered everything. I've already planned everything out. And it doesn't leave room for the student's voice, for the artist's voice. I think when we first got into doing art, it may have been because we saw something, we're like, oh, that's really cool. I wish I could do something like that. And then if we just copy somebody else and we're always kind of doing their thing, then we never discover what we want to say. We never discover what's important in the art making to us. And I think back to my own journey. When I was in middle school and high school, that's when Bob Ross was on PBS regularly. Well, I guess he still is. But this is when he was still alive and broadcasting. And I remember my dad and I watching him. And I was just really fascinated. And, I didn't know much about art. I had taken some art classes in high school. But, it's like we never went to museums. I didn't have any art history books. And so I was really fascinated by his work. Because it was just like, 30 minutes, bam, 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 here I have a painting. Let me hold that thought while I try this. And so I was completely fascinated by him and his work. And I think it was my sophomore year. I was 10th grade, so what was I, like 14 or 15? And I guess it would have been 15. And, I wanted to paint like Bob Ross. So my parents got me a Bob Ross painting set for Christmas that year. And of course, I was elated, I was overjoyed with it, and I sat out immediately and was painting the way he did, and I did that for quite a while. And then it just got to the point where I was like, oh, okay, I got bored with it, because it was like, okay, this is great, but I wasn't really into landscapes all that much. I was more into people, into portraits and things. And so it was like, okay, this Bob Ross got me into painting, but after a while, I was just sort of like, okay, I need to do my own thing. I need to discover what it is that jazzes me up about painting. And so if you've been kind of following along with me, and you've been, even if you're kind of making stuff similar to what I'm doing, maybe following along, I'm not saying don't do that. I think it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to figure some things out. But I think at some point it then becomes like, okay, what can I take from that experience and add that to my repertoire? What can I add? What can I take and use in my own art making? So I was just using a darker brown, this willow brown that I've used before. Time for some collage. Alright. So while that's drying, I think I'll hit it up with some ink. Alright, so talked about that form, talked about the squares and rectangles. The book pages, I mean, I've been really into using these old book pages for quite a while now, and I like it, number one, because it's just a visual texture, so I don't really use it because of what it says, at least for the most part. Sometimes I'll do something that's called blackout poetry with them, and that's where you actually select individual words and kind of recontextualize the words and kind of create poetry out of it. And but I like that visual texture of the text, but then also at the same time I kind of think about, like, the written word, even though we can't necessarily read what it says, or I mean, you can read a little bit, but it's not a whole page, it's not really making a lot of sense. So that idea of narrative or of story, also the fact that it's kind of a yellowed paper, so that idea of kind of history. And then these red lines that I'm drawing, if you've tuned in, you know that I do a lot of mapping marks. And I also use a lot of maps and collage those in. And that's a fascination that's gone on that's been years and years and years. I mean, I've been pretty much ever since I started doing mixed media art, I've been using maps. But it's that notion of the journey, and I think I've mentioned this before, just that idea of going on a journey, of having a journey. Life is a journey. There's a quote that I really, well, not really a quote, but I guess it is. The journey is the destination, which is the name of a book by about Dan Eldon. If you're not familiar with Dan Eldon, he was a photographer over in Africa, and he was killed when he was very young. I think 22, I think was how old he was. But he kept visual journals, and he's been a big influence on me as a visual journal keeper, and then as a mixed media artist. But that idea of maps, of being that journey, of mapping our journey, of figuring out where we're going, where we've been, where we're going. I think that's an interesting kind of idea to ponder. So I had this circle cut from yesterday. I don't know if I didn't use it yesterday because I felt like it was a little big. But you know what? I think I'm going to go ahead and use it on here. So I've been really incorporating a lot of these circles with this tree-like organic form. Really think about what circles themselves kind of are a symbol for wholeness or unity, independence. So kind of just thinking about that, and I like it because it's a single circle contrasts the rest of it pretty well. The only problem with this circle is that it kind of blends in with the text, so I think I'm going to grab... Let's use my red. I think I want a couple other circles in there. So one thing I noticed as I was painting over that red and I dried it, it's kind of faded some of the Inktense pencil underneath. And that seems to happen quite a bit, like when you are layering a lot of different colors on top of each other, especially on this paper. I don't know if it's specifically to this paper. This is Strathmore mixed media paper. I think sometimes there just gets so much pigment down that when you layer on top, it's hard to like. It's like it's just there's just too much pigment down, and so it just can't stick to the paper. I think I'll do kind of like I've done with some of the others. I like taking, I don't like that being totally white, that matte part there in the circle. So I kind of like using the yellow, making it yellow. And go ahead and put that yellow over in these other circles too. Been using colored pencils a lot for these little works. So pulled out my trusty colored pencils, and I'm gonna use a reddish brown to shade. So there's this one here. It's called Dark Terracotta. So it's gonna be similar to that Baked Earth Inktense pencil. Just going to pull out some of these squares, draw a little bit more attention to them. So by going back over these squares and just shading around them a little bit, it pulls them back out. So they were getting pushed pretty far into the piece, and actually up here, there's so much up here that you can't really see where it was. Actually, it's like right here. And so I like that. I enjoy that sort of push and pull. So just kind of bringing it back out. That way it's not totally lost. At the same time, I'm adding some little stripes with the colored pencil, just to have a few other little details in there. And then you've got this contrast between the straight lines and the curved lines. Alright, sorry about that. It just seemed like it decided to not work. So if you were paying attention, if you're in the middle of watching, it just seemed like it just cut out. Oh well, I always record to my computer, so if you're missing anything, or if there's, the internet's just not working that great, and I put it on YouTube, so since it's recorded to my computer, there's no glitching and jumping and stuff like that. So anyway, gotta love technology. I don't know when it cut out and how much people missed, but I think I'm going to use some of the same dark terracotta and do a little bit of shading. In that organic form. What's been really interesting is that, working this small, it's great to be able to like quickly do things, but then putting them all together and like just looking at them is really interesting. I can, when I'm all done, I'm going to share an image. I've been scanning them, so I haven't shared the scanned images yet, but it's really interesting to kind of look on the computer at all the ones that I've scanned all together and really just kind of see the whole body of work. And I highly recommend that. I know, if you end up making a whole bunch of stuff, it can be really difficult looking at it all. Even if you lay it out on the table, it could be really difficult to really appreciate it. And so if you can scan it or photograph it and look at it on the computer, the nice thing is you can zoom in, zoom out. You may hear artists and instructors talk about stepping back from the work. So that, that's pretty easy if you've got a big piece of artwork up on an easel, and then you could literally step back across the room and really look at it. But with a little piece like this, it's like it's little, so you're kind of already back from it. But yet, I kind of feel like sometimes with the little pieces, they're so little that it's very intimate. And so by looking at it on the computer, where you can kind of zoom out a little bit and make it smaller, you can really get a feel for the composition and kind of get a feel for how things are working. But then seeing all of the pieces, so this is number 28. So I had 27 earlier today. I was looking at all 27 pieces that I've done already so far, and it's just really interesting to see the trends, to see what's popping out, to see the things that are working and aren't working. It's just another way to kind of be reflective of your work. So I really like working with the Inktense pencils first, and then putting the colored pencil on top. Colored pencil can be hard to work with because when you shade with it, it leaves little specks of paper showing. I mean, that's how you get the various values with it. So a lot of folks have discovered how to basically paint with the colored pencil, where you layer it and you burnish it and you really cover up all the white of the paper. But that's such an intensive process. So I love being able to use the Inktense first, and that gets colored down. And then I can go back in with the colored pencil, and I don't have to do a whole lot of work with it. I can if I want to, and really develop using the colored pencil, but maybe you've seen on, especially on social media, a lot of places share, like I know Strathmore shares a lot of folks who do these photorealistic drawings with colored pencil, and it's like you use up a lot of the colored pencil in those images, and it's a lot of work to kind of blend all that stuff and layer all the colors together. So yeah, so I'm feeling like this one's done. It'll be interesting to kind of look at it in relationship to those other pieces. So I'm just going to sign it. And I'm going to call that one done. All right, well, thank you for joining me for day number 28. Yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of go through this journey and work on these things and figure out like what's really speaking to me, and to kind of move forward with that. So I'm really looking forward to being able to make some larger works of art. I've done a little bit of that, but not a lot. I just haven't had the time. So seeing how what I'm doing now influences the work that's yet to come, I'm pretty excited to kind of see that. I've got 2 more days of live streaming, hopefully, if the internet will hold up and not be so jittery and jumpy. And so I'm going to be back tomorrow, same time, 4 p.m., same thing on Wednesday. And then that'll be it for this 30-day challenge. Some of you that have tuned in know that I'm going to continue doing work, kind of do another challenge type thing in October. I'm calling it a Monster a Day challenge. And I don't know if I'm going to live stream that, partly because if my internet keeps being wonky, it's kind of a pain. So I might just do that as a work on my own and post images to social media, but we'll see. I just don't know. Or maybe I'll live stream less often or at different time of day or something. I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet, but yeah, so 2 more days of this challenge, and I'm so glad that you were able to join me. So if you got any questions, comments, concerns, pop them into the comments, and just kind of take a look at the comments. Yeah, so I just really appreciate you being here, taking your time, making some artwork with me maybe, and I will see you tomorrow.